Hello.
Hello.
Hey, Simon, it's Skylar. How you doing?
Simon.
Hello, Simon.
What's up, Simon?
Hello.
How you doing?
Hey,
Hello.
Simon.
Hello, Simon.
Hello, Simon.
Hi, my name is Simon Brooks and I am the host of Conversations with Storytellers, a podcast of wisdom, thoughts and folk and fairy tales from our elders, a meeting with professional storytellers. I decided to travel around the country when I could to interview some of the elders in the community of traditional storytelling, people who, for their work, travel about telling myths and legends, folk and fairy tales. Each storyteller shares their thoughts on our profession and gems of wisdom and sometimes a story or two. I'm glad you're here. Janice Del Negro is a professor at the School of Information Studies at Dominican University, where she teaches storytelling, children's and young adult literature, and foundations of library and information science. She is a storyteller, author, educator, and coach. She is incredibly respected in our community and has met and worked with many of our great storytellers. She challenges us to do better and is a huge supporter of storytelling. This was another one of those incredibly rich and lengthy conversations, so this is part 1 of 2. Please welcome Janice Del Negro. So Janice, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast, Conversations with Storytellers. I'm really looking forward to our discussion. For our listeners, Janice Del Negro is an associate professor at the Graduate School of Libraries and Information.
I'm a full professor now.
Oh, for our listeners who are listening, Janice Del Negro is not an associate professor, but a full professor at the Graduate School of Libraries and Information Science at Dominican University. She has been entered into the Circle of Excellence by the National Storytelling Network and has quite a few other awards tucked under her belt. And she's written a number of books. Janice has been a librarian and is probably still a librarian at heart and is, of course, a storyteller. It has been said that Janice has the infinite mind of a TARDIS and has as much knowledge, if not more, than the library that burnt down in Alexandria. Welcome, Dr. Janice.
Who said that?
I did, just now.
If only it were true. I'm a librarian, so I know just enough about a lot of things to be really annoying.
Or dangerous.
Really.
Or both.
It was my best job, that job.
As a children's librarian was the best job?
It was my best job. I've had, I had a lot of jobs up until that point. God, I was even a travel agent for a while. And, oh my God, yes. And I became a children's librarian almost, do you ever look back on your life and there's this long trail of things that led you to exactly where you are right now?
Yeah.
That you were totally unaware of at the time that they were happening?
Yeah.
Right. So that's sort of what it was like. I wound up as a children's librarian, I thought completely by chance. And it was just the best job ever. I got to do the things that I really love to do every day. And every day, even the bad days, I knew that I did something good.
Yeah.
So it was just the best job, and it was constantly reinvented all the time. So it was new every day, and it was great. And then they promoted me into administration, which I hate and I'm very bad at. And I'm really not good at it. And
you're a people person.
Nice, because it wouldn't get me. I wouldn't be here now. I wouldn't be where I am now if I didn't do all of those other things. Right. But I have reached the point where I know that administration is not my strong point. And they keep trying to put me in charge of things, and I keep saying no. I'm just like, don't you want to chair this committee? Not really. I'll be on it. I'll do whatever you want. I mean, I'm a really good second, but I do not want to be the person who has to schedule everything and manage the dates and make sure everything is on time. I'm one of those people who likes to wave at the deadlines as they go by, which is not really a good thing for an administrator. An administrator is supposed to be on top. So I so admire people who can do that. And I know, and I count on some people who can do that, because it's just not my. And now,
your forte or cup of tea. Yeah.
Either. It's neither of those things. And is that right? Either, neither. And especially now when time has no meaning at all.
I know when people say that it's the Twilight Zone, it really does feel like that. And I feel there's a whole generation, like this younger generation, that they need to start watching the Twilight Zone just to see what we mean. And they'll be like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is real.
I think it's streaming somewhere. I think you can get the old ones online.
Yeah, you can. You can.
I'm sorry, we went off on children's librarianship.
No, that's fine. Children's librarians are good things. So, so moving on from the children's librarian so you got your Bachelor of Arts, right? You got your BA.
I did. I had a BA in American literature with a minor in. I had a double minor in human communications and history, which essentially equipped me to do nothing. And although I don't think I would give it up for any reason, because it made the world bigger, which is exactly what education is supposed to do,
right,
as opposed to you should take this class because it will get you this job.
Right.
That is just the absolute baseline of what education is supposed to do for you.
Right.
And so I wouldn't change that. But I went to work, I worked for Hilton Hotels for a while, and I was a travel agent. I was a corporate travel agent for a while.
Wow.
And
the corporate travel agent has the smack of an administrator in it.
Oh, and I booked hotels and airplanes. That's what I did.
Okay.
For executives at a company. That's at a corporation. That's what I did. And
did that destroy your soul a little bit, or was it okay?
I can't tell you how I coped with it, because it's not legal in many states. So I just was, and I was doing that, and the money was good, So
I bet, yeah.
I had a really nice apartment. I had an apartment in Queens with a friend. We had a formal dining room and a fireplace, which you couldn't even touch now. But yes, it was less than fulfilling. So I went back to school, and I thought I was going to be an academic librarian because I was really good at school. And I thought, well, I'll just be an academic librarian, and then I'll just go to school forever and just collect degrees, and, I'll be happy that way. And I went to work for a woman named Margaret Porch. She was a professor at my library school. And she was from the American South. And she was an Army librarian, but she was a youth services specialist in the Army. She did children's services on a variety of bases around the world. And she landed at my school, and I was her assistant. I became her graduate assistant in this which then I thought was a fluke, and now I realize was the hand of destiny. And what I did mostly for her classes was I kept track of her appointments, and I pulled books for her classes. And I would pull things on this book truck. I have entire book trucks full of books, and I would say, "Oh, Margaret, I read this when I was a kid." Or Margaret, I read this when I was. And finally, at one point, she just looked at me and said, "For heaven's sake, you're not supposed to be an academic librarian. Academic libraries are boring. Yours, children's services, you're supposed to be a children's librarian." And I did. And it was the best job. Not to mention it led me to storytelling, which was how I got to storytelling in the first place.
So were they taught when you were getting your MLS? Was that taught,
yes,
storytelling?
Yes, and it's still taught. I teach it in graduate school. I teach it in the School of Information Studies at Dominican. And Margaret taught it. I was at a state university at Geneseo in New York. Mm-hmm. And Margaret taught storytelling there. And I had such terrible stage fright. So bad. I mean, I used to shake, and go into it was dreadful. But I loved, there was something about storytelling, So when I got a job in Chicago, I moved to Chicago, and another one of those flukes, which is, now the hand of destiny. And there was some trip being organized to go to the National Storytelling Festival. and
Jonesboro, Tennessee.
Jonesboro, and I went in a van with 7 other people, most of whom I didn't know, and this was like in 1981, Simon.
So this is like pretty close to the
really
beginning of it.
early.
Yeah.
Yes, and it wasn't as slick as it is now. And I don't mean slick in a negative way. I just mean
Yeah.
they've been doing it so long, they really know how to do it. I mean, it's really. So it still had kind of I don't know. It still had sort of an informal feel to it. I mean, I saw Ray Hicks on the stage there. I saw Pete Seeger was there.
Wow.
I went to a show there once, and everybody had gone it was raining. And everyone had gone to the graveyard, to the cemetery for ghost stories. And that was when it was still small enough that you could have ghost stories in the graveyard up the hill.
Yeah.
Main Street. And I was like, oh, I'm not sitting out in a cemetery. I mean, come on. I'm not sitting in a cemetery in the rain. Seriously. So I went to this tent, and it was Pete Seeger and Bill Harley.
Oh, wow.
I'll never get a chance to see Pete Seeger again, right? If I don't go to this. So in I went, and there couldn't have been, maybe there were 150 people in there, maybe 200,
And to give a reference to those people that don't know this, the tents seat about 1,000, 1,500.
So this was a small tent, which was right where they now locate the food trucks.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And it was raining out, and we were wrapped in a blanket, and everybody had a little something in their flask because it was cold and damp. And Bill Harley and Pete Seeger were up there on the stage, and Bill was so excited. He was so excited. I mean, it was Pete Seeger, for God's sake. It was the best show. It was amazing. It was really amazing. And it wound up being this raucous sing-along by the end of the night. And we had a ball. I mean, we just had a blast. And then everybody was wandering back from the ghost stories, all damp and wet and bedraggled. And we were so happy. It was like, you went to the wrong place. This was one of the nights where I really picked the right place to be. And it was wonderful. And
Bill's
what storytelling is like.
Yeah, I do. And I know what Bill's like too.
Well,
Bill's a spitfire.
It's one of my favorite memories I've known Bill as a storytelling acquaintance for a long time, and it's one of my favorite memories of him. It's right up there with Dovey and I were in a festival in Michigan.
Okay.
And I was the only one with a car because I drove there, because I drive everywhere. And so I was in charge of driving Dovey and Bill to wherever we were going to tell that day. I think it was, I can't remember. Barbara Schutzgruber would smite me. But the best thing in the world was driving the car and listening to 2 of them talk. Because if I didn't laugh, I laughed all the way there and all the way back because they were so funny. They were so funny. And I can't remember anything that happened. I can't remember anything anybody said except that we laughed a lot. So
yeah, and Bill's deep as well. He's very deep. And when you look at his stories, you think, well, they're fun and they're silly and all the rest of it. But when you actually have a conversation with the guy, he's really deep, and I got a lot of admiration for Bill. So, were there any storytellers in your family growing up? What was it like being little young Janice?
So I had an Irish mother and an Italian father, and
that must have been exciting.
And life was always interesting. And then my sister Bonnie married a Greek, so that really increased our options as regards family gatherings in terms of food, right?
Yeah.
In terms of holiday eating, it was pretty. It was a huge extended family of people who, no matter what else was going on, when we got together as a family, we were happy to be together, and we were happy to sit around and cook and eat and talk and play cards. And, I don't know nearly enough family stories, I think now, but every now and then a little piece of one will pop up and remind me. But I really, and it's one of those things we usually, even now, we carry that sort of everybody together for the holiday big family thing. We always go to my sister Joan's in New York for Thanksgiving. And there's about 34 of us, and we all just sort of move into her house, which is certainly not equipped to handle 34 of us in any possible way. So you can just imagine there are people like piled all over the floor. And my nephew Gregory used to sleep under the dining room table because he said it was the only place he could sleep where no one would step on him. Yes. And it was just, but of course, we're not doing that this year, which makes me very sad. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's the first time, and it has to be 25 years.
Wow.
Wow.
So you heard, even if you can't remember, probably a lot of family stories.
I did hear some, and they were, you know, I heard about my Uncle Jack coming back from the war after they thought he was dead. You know, they got an MIA telegram, and then the war was over, and there he was. I heard about that. That
must have been absolutely wonderful.
That's kind of an amazing story too. He was a bombardier.
Bombardier.
Yeah, he got shot down over Germany and force marched, and the Allies were chasing them. And I never saw him. He was a very controlled man. You know, I think now we would have looked at it and said he had probably had PTSD when he came back from the war, but then they didn't talk about it the same way then.
Right.
And, he used to come to my sister Joan's for Thanksgiving, and he was the kind, you know, he liked to be in the same house with us. He just didn't want to be in the same room. You know? So
he liked the vibe, but not.
But he didn't want to be like in the crowd. And every now and then he would come out and he'd have a cup of tea and a cookie or a piece of pie, and he'd say hello to everyone, and then he'd go away. Then he'd go back to watching the football game because he was a big football fan. And there was one year when, I don't know, somebody in Iran, I think, was talking about this book by a professor at Northwestern University that was it was a Holocaust denial book. And it had, you know, anybody with any real credential was just appalled, including all of the professors at Northwestern. And so this politician said that this was one of his favorite books, and it proved that the Holocaust didn't really exist, and you know, and everyone was lying. And my uncle had never read the book, but he read the newspaper article, and it was the first time in my whole life. And I mean, my uncle lived with us when I was little, and so I really knew him since I was a child, and it was the first time in all the years that I'd known him that I ever saw him angry. He was absolutely furious in ways that I had never seen before. And he just looked at me at one point and he got me by the wrist and he said, "I saw what they did." He said, "I know what they did. I saw what they did there. You can't tell me this didn't happen because I saw what they did." So he was really, I mean, the man was incredibly conservative and somewhere to the right of Genghis Khan, but he was not. This was something that you could not. He saw the camps. He saw what was left of the camps. He saw the people who had managed to live through the camps, and he was just my Irish uncle.
Oh, that must have been. I can't even imagine what that must have been like.
It's just
to be one of the people that came into the camps to see these folks, and
he never talked about the war, you know, Simon.
I don't think anybody did.
My mother said he came home. She was at the laundromat doing laundry, and she saw this man come up over the street. They grew up in the Bronx. I grew up in the Bronx too, and so this man in a uniform with a cane come over the hill and walk down the street, and she didn't recognize him because he looked so different.
Oh my gosh.
Her brother. And when he got closer, she realized it was her brother. And up until that point, they thought he was dead. because they had this MIA telegram and, missing in action, presumed dead. And there he was. And she said he sat at the kitchen table with her that night and he told her everything about his time, about what happened to him. And then he never talked about it again. I think he talked to my nephews a little bit at one point when they were thinking about joining the service, and that time when he read that newspaper article. That was
Wow.
the time.
Oh, sends shivers down my spine.
So
It really
all these
does.
powerful things that people live with all the time.
Yeah.
The stories are really powerful. They're really powerful things.
Yeah. I was
People
talking with Ray Christian,
Mm-hmm.
who's a vet, and he says that he's heard these people that talk about being in the army and they tell all these stories, and he's like, these are stories that they've heard and they haven't actually experienced what they're talking about. It's just because the people that experience them don't tell those stories.
No. My nephew, we have a lot of Marines in the family, and my nephew was a Marine, is a Marine. You're always a Marine. Once a Marine, you're always a Marine. And he was writing letters to his mother, my sister, and he would tell her the things that he was having to go through in training, like, crawling through a pipe full of water with an inch of air at the top, or crawling under barbed wire with live ammunition. And she finally had to write him a note and say, "You can't tell me these things."
Yes, right. Mums don't want to know that
You
stuff.
can't tell me this because I don't sleep for weeks after.
Yeah.
So it was pretty funny, actually. But
Yeah, they have a rough life of it. So you became, going back to the children's librarian thing, you became a children's librarian, and I'm assuming that you started telling stories to kids. And
yes.
then what was the next step for you?
I belonged to a storytelling group in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
So I told stories there for a while. I remember, I did a lot of work with babies, with preschoolers, 3 to 5s.
Oh, wow. Good for you.
I just love them to pieces. I really do. But I was doing a lot of programming because we were sort of like little programming machines, and I did 5 preschool story times and 3 toddler programs a week. And that didn't even count, the other things that were happening after school programming and things like that. And I'd been doing them for a while, preschool story programs, and I was bored. Don't tell anybody I said that. Here we are on a podcast. Don't tell anybody.
I know, right?
Because I'd been doing them for such a long time, and they told me 2 things in library school, and one of them I believed, and one of them I didn't believe, and it should have been exactly the other way. Because one of them was preschoolers need the stimulation of the visual. You can't just tell them an oral story. And the other one was never tell a story you don't like.
Yeah.
And I thought, of course preschoolers need the visual, right? Of course they need the visual. You can't, they're so little, blah, blah, blah. And then I said, and of course you're going to tell stories for events. You're going to learn things just to do for events or themes or special occasions. Well, preschoolers will listen to you tell a story without a book, and you should never tell a story that you don't like.
Yeah.
And with a little imagination, any story can fit any theme. All you have to do is figure out how you're going to introduce it.
Right.
Right. So I was in story time one day, and here I am with my 24, 3.5 to 5-year-olds on the floor. And they'd been coming, we do series. So they'd been coming to me for weeks, right? So they knew me and I knew them. And I'm telling them the 3 billy goats gruff. And I'm using this big, giant, really ugly picture book, but you could see the pictures. So, and I realized I'm not even looking at the book because I've told this story so many times that I don't even have to look now. And I realize as I'm turning the pages that they aren't looking at the book at all. They're watching my face. And I thought, well, isn't this interesting? So I sat on the book And I just kept telling them the story, just talking to them. And, and as they just sort of scooted up on the floor until they were like crowded around my feet. And, one or two of them were hanging onto the hems of my pants as I was telling the story. And they were so in it. It was just so amazing to watch and to be in this dynamic. And so after it was over, we acted it out and we had a great time, right? We had a wonderful time. And when it was over, I tell the story in one of the books. And when it was over, I had one of the boys, he was about 4, asked me to, next week we'll do the 3 Little Pigs. Right? And I said, sure, and forgot all about it. I totally forgot it. And I went out and I thought, oh, great, we'll just do this like little creative dramatics thing at the end of story time. I'll do one story without a book and it changed everything. I mean, it changed the whole dynamic of the program. And the next week came along and I did my bit and we were done. It was over. And this little boy looked up and said, but you said we'd do the 3 Little Pigs. And I couldn't not do it. Right? I couldn't not do it. How do you know you can't?
Yeah. No, you can't.
And I mean, I was in a position of trust here, I mean, I'm not allowed to, you can't break promises to 4-year-olds. So
no.
So I said, okay, we'll do the 3 Little Pigs. The only problem was I didn't know it.
Oh, you didn't?
I didn't know the story. All I knew was the Disney movie.
Okay.
Because at one of the libraries I worked at, it was the only movie we had and we showed it all the time. So that was the only thing I knew. And I said to them, I said, okay, but you're going to have to help me because I haven't told the story. I haven't told the story yet, which you'd never tell to a bunch of adults, right? But kids don't care. They're like, okay, we'll help. We're just, sure. I love them so much. And so we told the 3 Little Pigs. And, it's always, I had a little boy who wanted to be the mother. So he was the mother pig. And I had 3 little pigs, 2 boys and a girl. And I had the big bad wolf, which was the cutest girl with the pinkest ribbons in preschool story time.
Nice.
Always. It's always that one, the quiet one, the shy one who wants to be the bad guy. It never failed, really. Yeah. And so we're doing this creative dramatics thing and I'm standing in one corner and I'm the door, right? I'm the door of the house. And I have the first little pig is behind me. And the wolf comes up, let me in, let me in. And I open my mouth to say something, and the child behind me sticks her head out and says, not by the hair on my chinny chin chin. And I started laughing, and we were off. I mean, we just went off, and we did the whole story. And at the end, when the wolf goes down the chimney and lands in the pot, and the wolf came down the chimney and landed in the pot, and there was wolf stew for lunch. And all the kids burst into applause and cheers. And in the meantime, I had parents walking back and forth at the door of the preschool room because we were like 15 minutes overtime now. And the kids were howling. They were just howling with laughter the whole time. And it was just, it's an amazing thing working with this age. And I know a lot of people don't like it. They don't like to do it because they're unpredictable. Preschoolers are unpredictable and they're not socialized.
They're not conditioned. Yeah.
Yes. If they don't like what you're doing, they're going to play with the Velcro on their shoes, or they're going to go crawling out of the room, or they're going to start pulling somebody's hair. I mean, they're just going to ignore you and do something else. Right. If they're not having, so I think it makes some people nervous, but I had a very restrained childhood in some ways, because my father was very ill most of my life. And it wasn't until I was working with babies at the library that I learned how to play with them. You have to learn how to play because that's what they do. That's their job.
Right. Yeah.
That's their job. 3 to 5s is to play.
It is. It's so
and
true.
You have to play with them, and you have to give up any illusion of control because that's not real. That's That's not a real thing.
Yeah.
And just go with it. Right. So we had a ball in Storytime. We had great fun doing it. And people are surprised sometimes when I say that. I sometimes will call up my friend Janet, who's a children's librarian still.
Mm-hmm.
And I call her up and say, okay, I need a baby hit. I have to come to your library and do preschool story time because I haven't done preschool story time in a long time and I need to have some babies. And of course, we're not doing that now, but she would let me. I'd go over and get my preschool hit and tell preschool stories. And
that's so funny. I love them.
I love them. I really do. And I loved high school students.
Yeah.
Which was something else that people don't like is middle schoolers and high school and
oh my God, yeah,
high school. But I discovered that the trick with sixth graders is to scare the hell out of them with the first story that you tell.
Oh, really? The first story out of the box.
The very first one out of the box. And then they'll listen to you tell them anything you want.
Yeah.
You just have to kind of if they're not used to storytelling, and a lot of kids aren't.
It's true.
You have to prove to them that it's not story time, that it's not baby stuff.
Yeah.
And they think they're too cool for school anyway. So
it's true.
Terror is a good thing.
It is. I told the story Waylon Smith, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I went into a middle school and I told that story, and the kids, their mouths were hitting the floor as Wayland skinned the skulls to turn into goblets. They're like,
how it works. Yes, indeed. And I find with high school students, they will never admit this to you. They are very fond of the lush romantic fairy tale.
They are.
Yes. Which is
I found that out.
People, right? Isn't it?
It is.
And,
well, if you think about it, it does make sense because they're getting to that age where that sort of stuff is getting real, and there's this, what they see on TV is no different to a fairy tale, except fairy tales, I think, have a better way of telling that story, that romanticism.
They do.
It's more real.
The structure keeps it in line.
Yeah.
I mean, the most outrageous things can happen in those stories, and the structure is such that it holds all that magic inside. Right?
It does.
Structure is a lot. Structure is, if not everything, it's a lot as far as storytelling.
Yeah. Yeah. I was talking to Reggie Carpenter when we were at the Stone Soup Storytelling Festival last year, and we were talking about personal stories and folk and fairy tales, and she said that everyone should start with folk and fairy tales so that they get to understand what story structure is.
Oh, absolutely, I agree.
And when she said that, I looked at all the storytellers I knew who told personal narrative, and the best ones were the ones that came from a folk and fairy tale background that switched over. It was
because structure is, you have no control. If you don't understand the structure of your story, you don't have any control over it. If you don't have control over your story, you have no business telling it to a public audience.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I find that really, I hit structure really hard when I'm teaching storytelling. And we start with folktales. We start with traditional story. And by the time they get to their fifth story, they can tell anything they want by the time they get to the fifth story. And so I've had a bunch of personal tales. I had one of the funniest job interview stories I'd ever heard. And they knew the form because we talked about it all the time. So when they put their story together, they knew what kind of structure, they knew how to structure it.
Yeah.
So that it would be effective in the telling. And it was better than, the personal stories that my students told are better than many of the stories that I hear by professional tellers. So there.
We're going to move on from there.
Yeah, okay.
So you're very much interested in bringing out and showing the strong female in stories. One of your books, Lucy Dove, which is a great name, by the way, I love that name, is a retelling of The Sprightly Tailor, but you cast a female lead in it.
I did.
Many of the early collections of folk tales were collected by men.
Yes.
And at the time period in which they were collected, we're talking about, Germany with Grimm, France with Perrault, Norway with Moe and Asbjornsen.
Sure, the 19th century.
Yeah, and Jacobs and Lang and Burton from Britain. It was there was quite a strict moral Christian point of view which these people were living. The collectors of these stories.
Yes. And they came from a particular class. They were an educated,
Yeah.
they were educated
Right.
gentlemen, really.
Yes.
So and God bless them for making the effort, right? Because if they
Right.
hadn't collected them, what would we have? Right? What would there be now? If they hadn't collected,
Yeah, they'd be gone.
they would be gone. And so sometimes I think about all the things we didn't get, right? What didn't get collected.
Mm-hmm.
While they were collecting stories in the parlor, what were the women talking about in the kitchen?
Yeah.
What kind of stories were the women telling in the kitchen? And so you think about all those stories that didn't get told, but I'm grateful for the ones that did. And when you look at the collections in the 70s, when they started to come out with collections of folk tales with strong women, for example.
Like the Ethel Phelps books.
Yes, that one, Rosemary Menard, women, folk,
Mm-hmm.
and fairy tales, and Phelps is Maid of the North. Those titles.
Yeah.
If you look at the notes in those books, they went back to the old collections for them. They went back to Asbjornsen and Moe, and they went back to Lang and Jacobs and the Grimms, and the Russian, Afanasieff, whose name I'm probably pronouncing really.
Yeah, there's no way I was going to try and pronounce that.
I pronounce it the way it's spelled, which I'm sure is not right. But they went back to those collections. So it wasn't as if the stories didn't exist before, because they did. It was just that they're not the stories that were collected, that were anthologized and turned into picture books.
Right.
And Disney did not make them into movies. Disney really, until very recently, stuck very closely to the Western European fairy tale canon, right? Disney didn't really stray very far from that. And when you ask people if they know the story of Cinderella, for example, they'll say yes, because they've seen the movie.
Right.
Not because they've read, the 600 some odd variations of Cinderella that there are all around the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think that it's really interesting that those stories, we do have versions of those stories available to us that were collected in the 19th century. They just weren't the stories that were picked up and told.
Popularized. Yeah.
And popularized. So that became, so that's an interesting point. But we wouldn't have, Kathleen Reagan's, oh God, I always get this title wrong. Wise Girls, Beloved Sisters, and something by Reagan. You have it on the shelf, right?
I do. I'm looking for it. Where is it?
Floating around here somewhere.
Fearless Girls.
There you go. Fearless
Wise
Girls.
Women and Beloved Sisters.
This is a great book, right? And it has great notes. And it's
some of the notes I do take on. Some of the notes are really good, but she wields a heavy stick against men.
Her personal notes, I'm not crazy about.
Yeah.
But I like her source notes a lot.
I do too. Yeah.
Having a source note means I can go find the story the way that she found it.
Right.
And I can see what she did to it in the retelling, if she did anything. So I got interested in retelling fairy tales and creating original fairy tales when there was a big issue in the storytelling world about copyright and who owned what story, and there was the same things that we're talking about today still. Who got to tell what from where and all that stuff. And I remember leaving one conference and thinking I was never going to tell a story again.
Wow. Because
it was so storytelling had been such a sort of open, welcoming community for so many people in the 80s. Mm-hmm. And And then when it became a business, we were talking about all kinds of different things. More things came to the forefront, a lot of which had nothing to do with actual story. And so that was that kind of, but it pushed me into examining my relationship with the folk and fairy tale and deciding what did I want to do with them and how did I want to do it. And you mentioned Lucy, which was, I'd been telling the sprightly tailor for a long time, and it was okay. It was all right. The kids liked it, right? I mean, what's not to like? Monsters in a graveyard, it's cool.
Yeah.
But I was looking at my storytelling repertoire one day and realized that I had no old women. I had girls and I had young women and I had teenagers and I had no old women. And so because I am a lazy sort, I looked at the sprightly tailor and thought, well, I wonder if I can shift this so that I can tell this story and give. And I can't tell you how many permutations this story went through before it wound up in this picture book, and now I look at it and I go, yeah, this is the problem with printing things on paper, right? But once they're on paper, it's done, right? It's kind of locked onto the page. Whereas when we're telling stories, we get to change them every time we tell them.
Yeah.
Right? So there's always a chance to improve the story or alter the line or do whatever, right? There's always a chance to do it better the next time, which I find very reassuring.
Yeah.
So I mean, at first she was the tailor's grandmother, and then she was, and I was like, well, that's not going to work because there's just too much, front loading for that. I can't deal with that. We need to get to the graveyard really fast, and she needs a name. I want to name this character, right? So a friend of mine had just had a little girl and he named her Lucy, and I was irritated because I wanted to name my first girl Lucy, and that didn't happen because Stephen did it. And so I thought, well, I'll name her Lucy. So what can I give her as a last name? So I was looking for, I was like Lucy Taylor, Lucy Button. I said, oh God, that's so cute. I can't do that. And I was looking up, I have about, I don't know, 7 or 8 different thesauri, right? And the English dictionary floating around. And
I'm impressed.
So I'm going through my stuff, trying to find things and trying to find a name. And I found the term dovetail, which is a tailoring term about how you put 2 pieces of material together and sew them together. You can tell I'm a seamstress, right? You can tell I'm really good at this. And dovetail was too long, but dove worked fine because it worked with the rhythm of the story, right? It worked in the telling.
Yeah. No, I love that name. It's such a great name.
And I find, so there she was, I finally had her. I had a name for her, and that made me really happy. And then I was able to sort of shift the story to be more from her position, which was she'd gotten fired, right? She got laid off from the laird's household, and the chance he offered a bag of gold to anyone who could sew him a pair of lucky trousers in the graveyard by the light of the moon. So this was her chance. This was her only chance. This was the only thing that was going to keep her from starving in the street, was if she could do this. And so she bets everything on this one turn. She bets everything. And she goes to the graveyard at night where nobody goes because everybody knows that there's something really awful there. And off she goes, and she manages to sew the trousers and make her escape and get her bag of gold and ends up with a bag of gold and a house on the beach, which is something that works really well for me.
Nice. Yes.
Right? A bag of gold and a house on the beach. And I found that. So I'm telling the story, and in the middle of the story is this conversation between Lucy and the boggle in the graveyard. And In the traditional story, it's the monster says, "Do you see this great head of mine?" And the tailor responds, "I see that, but I'll sew this." And then it's, "Do you see this great neck of mine?" "I see that, but I'll sew this." And that goes on until the monster is fully emerged from the ground and gives chase to the tailor. And I always used to forget it. Forget this conversation. And I mean, I had terrible trouble getting the timing right and trying to figure out what was. And
That's such a great part of the story because you can goof around with it.
Well, yes, but see, I wasn't doing that. I was staying with this traditional back and forth. And I have discovered in my old age that if there's a part of a story that you can't remember or that you miss every time, that it's not something that's wrong with you. There's something wrong with the story. So you need to fix it. So I was kind of noodling around with this conversation when I spoke to the woman who would be my editor in this picture book. And she said to me, and this is something I tell students all the time, the conversation in the graveyard is the only place where she really speaks.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the only place that we get to hear her and get to know who she is. And I went, oh, there we go. So who is she? Right? Who is she? How would she do it? What would she do? And she's a smart ass, Lucy. She is. She's a smart ass. She's got a sharp tongue and she knows
she's a cake cracker nuts.
And she's not interested in, she doesn't suffer fools really well. And so this conversation in the graveyard turned into this whole other thing, right? He says, "Do you see this great head of mine?" And she is like terrified, sitting on this gravestone trying to sew these trousers. And she looks up and she says, "I beg your pardon, did you say something?" And he strains and he reveals his neck and he says, "Do you see this great neck of mine?" She says, "Oh, I see it," she says. "Oh, I know who you are. You're that wee bogle they tell all the stories about." And that's what starts their conversation. And so she keeps him entertained or exasperated with her conversation until she finishes the pants, right? Until she sews that last stitch. And then she's out of there.
Yeah.
She jumps up with the trousers, she clutches them to her chest and she races out of the graveyard. And the monster is so surprised that somebody is actually trying to run away from him that he gives her like a minute, a few steps, and then he pulls that leg out of the ground and he chases her. And he doesn't catch her, in case anyone's wondering. And but it was that whole conversation, and that changed how I looked at characters and stories after that. Because the only way you know who they are is if they speak. And so when you add dialogue to a traditional story, it really livens up your story, and it captures your listeners because people want to hear the conversation, right? They want to hear the conversation. So that was really, that changed a lot of things for me. And I also had to decide if I was going to treat folktales as a cultural artifact, or I was going to be part of the oral tradition in the course of as I told them, as tellers have done for decades, if not centuries and centuries. So so I do a lot of original stuff now, a lot of retellings. Some stories I do are close to the way that I found them. But none of them are ever the same as I found them. But part of the fun of retelling a traditional tale that everybody knows is telling it from a point of view that no one has told it from before. And so that becomes something else to look at. I'm still trying to find a way into Sleeping Beauty, though. She's boring, Simon. What am I going to do with her? She's asleep for the whole story, although you could probably make a pretty good running joke about her napping.
Wow. We are just beginning to get deep, and if you made it here, the second part is even better. If you liked what Janice said and want to hear more of her work, contact her at storytelling.org/Del Negro. That's DELNEGRO. Janice is also working on a series telling stories with Megan Wells. It's called Moonshine Stories and are told on the full moon. If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, be sure to check out other episodes. And if you think I should interview a certain folk and fairy tale, myths and legends storyteller, send me an email. You can find me and my work on Facebook and on my website at simonbrooksstoryteller.com and on Instagram, Simon M. Brooks. Diamond Scree? Yep, that's me, the English fella and storyteller. A shout out to Chris Jedd for creating and recording and letting me use his music for my podcast. His band is called Blackpool Mecca. Check them out. You can help keep this podcast alive and support my craft by becoming one of my patrons and paying anything from $1 an episode you enjoyed to a regular monthly subscription. In return, you get extras, early release, and exclusive content of my work. That's at www.patreon.com/Simon Brooks. Thanks to all of you for supporting my little podcast. I greatly appreciate it. Want your name mentioned? Join my little tribe. If you can't join these wonderful folks, then you can help me out by doing something you can do. I would very much appreciate it if you were to leave a review on Podbean, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, wherever you found this episode. It won't take long and it helps not just me, but others find and enjoy this podcast. Thanks again for being here with me. I know that there are a lot of other places that you could be, and I appreciate it. Until next time, be healthy, be happy, and share the stories you love. Cheers. Simon out.
It's just a story. Just a story. Yeah.